Hello and welcome to the Season 2 finale of the 007 Files. I'm co-host Javi Trujillo, and joining me today is David Leigh.
Hello there.
And of course, Bill Koenig.
Hi, everyone.
So, this episode went through a couple of iterations. Originally, we were going to talk about the prospective list for Bond directors. And in the time that prospective list came out, only a few days later, Variety broke that Denis Villeneuve is to direct the James Bond film at Amazon. They led with the story on June 25th. And so we have our Bond 26, or Amazon Bond #1 director, with his wife, Tanya Lapointe, signing on as executive producer. And of course, that doesn't rule out Amy Pascal and David Heyman. They're still producers as well. Denis goes on to say that some of my earliest movie-going memories are connected to 007. I grew up watching James Bond films with my father, ever since Dr. No with Sean Connery. I'm a die-hard Bond fan. To me, thank you. David, let's start off with you. What is your initial reaction to this news?
Well, to be honest, I was quite surprised because he is about to start shooting the third Dune film, as far as we know. There doesn't seem to be any firm date, but everything points to... originally they were talking about June, but now I understand that it's more likely to be July or August that they start shooting, maybe in Hungary. But it's difficult to find any solid details about it. But, so... that is going to take, 6-9 months, I would have thought. So, and then, followed by post-production, and the film is supposed to be premiering at the end of 2026. So that, for me, ruled him out as director if they really want to get going on Bond. So that was my initial reaction, almost before he was announced, because... he was one of the directors that they were talking about being shortlisted. So when I did learn that he was announced, which was it was about the first thing I saw online on Thursday morning, thanks to you two. And it was like, well, I don't know why they always have to announce things these days when I'm asleep. And it was like, oh my God, I was actually walking the dog, and it was like, what? So I walked the dog rather quickly, and he doesn't really like it in this heat. But and it was one of the things about him, and I apparently I need to learn to say Denis Villeneuve rather than Dennis, which I've been calling him up to now. So thanks for the language tip. One of the things about it is that I thought really he wasn't all that well suited to Bond, because his films, particularly Blade Runner and well, the first Dune, I missed the second Dune so far. I've been meaning to catch up with it on streaming, but I haven't done that yet. They are long films. They're 2 3/4 hours, something like that. They're quite slow moving, and so that was my initial feeling about it, that that style of filmmaking doesn't suit Bond at all. And I did a video basically saying that on Thursday, but well, my feelings have evolved a bit when I've been, based on some of the feedback I got on that video and thinking about it, because, it's always good to have a bit of time to reflect on these things.
And Bill, how about you? This broke really late in the day for us in the U.S., and I know we had a little bit of a back and forth while David was sleeping across the world. Share with everybody what you thought initially when the news broke.
Well, Villeneuve had been approached by Eon back in the Bond 25 days, and he was on a podcast. I'd have to go look it up, which podcast. And he was mostly talking about Dune, but he did acknowledge that he had been approached about Bond 25, that he had to take a pass because he had committed to doing Dune. So he's been talked about for years. In 2017, The Guardian did this ran this commentary, practically begging the guy to direct Bond 25. I think that was before his Dune involvement was confirmed. And I can tell you that he has some very, very intense fans. In 2017, while there was all this buzz about him and Bond, I went to see Blade Runner 2049 in the theater, because it wasn't doing that well in the U.S., and I knew it wasn't going to be in the theater that much longer. So I had a day off in the middle of the week, and I went to see it. And I did a post. It wasn't a full-fledged review, but I just said, well, okay, people are talking about Villeneuve. Let me make some observations about Blade Runner 2049. And I said, 1, it looks gorgeous. 2, it does move slow. And I made some, and I said specifically, it's like it's so taken with it, just how good it looks, that it's like they kind of like stop to admire it, and then it's like, oh wait, we got to move the plot forward. So then so then it moves forward for a little bit, and then it starts admiring its visuals again. But then I concluded, I said, there's more positives than negatives. But anyway, some Villeneuve fan just went after me on Twitter. I did not appreciate the genius of Denis Villeneuve. So that was an interesting experience. I was out golfing and made the mistake of checking my phone, and then, gee whiz. He has, on multiple occasions, talked how much he likes Bond. He said it, in that 2017 podcast when he was talking about Dune. He said it again in 2021 when he was on Happy, Sad, Confused podcast. He'd love to do Bond someday. This was just before No Time to Die came out, and he talked, he complimented Daniel Craig and things. So then, this month in June, this list of 5 possible leading directors comes out, and he's on the list. And like David, I was thinking, boy, with doing this third Dune movie, I just don't see how. And I guess Amazon is willing to wait for him. Which now they're talking like it might be 2028 before the movie comes out. Now, just in the broader context, Amazon MGM is trying to be a real movie studio again. Earlier this year at the CinemaCon presentation, that's where the studios go to talk to the theater owner, they publicly committed to doing 15 or 16 theatrical releases a year. I mean, MGM hasn't done that in a long time. Yeah. And, they hadn't gone to CinemaCon for a long time. But this year they went. And that's when they said, that Heyman and Pascal were in London starting working on the Bond movie. So obviously Bond's important to them. They wouldn't have spent however much they spent to get the creative control. But Bond's not the only thing they've got going. So maybe they figure they've got enough projects in the pipeline now. They can wait for Bond to come out in 2028. I don't know. But also, it subsequently came out, Villeneuve is only signed for one movie. But that's understandable. Heyman and Pascal are only signed for one movie. But this tells me, boy, Amazon's really all in on this. I don't think Villeneuve comes cheap, and and you've got
does.
Yeah, and you've got to you've got to take his posse, his wife as an executive producer. So whatever, style and directing style aside, Amazon MGM seems very serious about this. Now, we'll see if Villeneuve is really suited to Bond. We won't know that for, apparently 3 years now. But, yeah, that's basically my reaction. One quick thing about that statement that Javi read, the quote from Villeneuve. I kind of had a Lieutenant Columbo moment where he says, well, I've watched him with my dad ever since Dr. No and Sean Connery. Like, well, wait a minute. He was born after Dr. No came out. I don't know. it was inartfully phrased. As I've said before, you see a quote in a press release, chances are the person didn't actually say it originally. They eventually, proved it. But I could see where, as the PR and the lawyers were going through it, said, hey, we got to mention Dr. No. Hey, we got to mention Sean Connery. And that's what happened. But, I don't see anything sinister. I take him at his word. He's a Bond fan. And because he said it so often, So
yeah, I don't think there's any doubt there.
Having just recently gone through some of the Sean Connery movies in 4K, where they have, still all the old trailers. Yeah, he was born in 1967, which would have been You Only Live Twice. But looking at all those trailers, there's quite a few of them that are advertising double features of like Dr. No and Goldfinger and Thunderball and You Only Live Twice. So it's possible that back then he could have seen them. Connery was the Bond when he was born. It's quite possible that his dad did take him to the cinema and, caught a re-release, because that's how they did those things back then. So it factually doesn't seem like it makes sense, but it could have very well happened. It obviously wasn't on VHS because that wasn't a thing back then. So,
and obviously it wasn't first run.
Yeah, definitely not first run, but it is possible. And similar to what you said, like when we discussed this earlier, when that list of 5 broke, I'm like, there's no way. 9 days ago, as of this recording, Hans Zimmer was quoted on Joe Blow. I think it was at the F1 premiere, that he had been speaking with Denis and they were ready to start filming this summer. And I was like, filming this movie with a December 2026 release date with the amount of effects and the scope, I'm like, there's no way he's going to do Bond. I didn't think it was a legit possibility. 3 days later, this breaks. I'm like, well, I obviously know nothing about the film industry. And, I forget who it was. It might have been a YouTuber named Dan Merle, who pointed out that Steven Spielberg made Schindler's List and Jurassic Park at the same time. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Spielberg is one of Denis' film heroes, but I didn't think it was a possibility at all. But I'm excited for it, because this is I think he's been nominated 3 times for Best Picture.
I think 3 times. That's right.
And Arrival and Dune Parts 1 and 2, I think, were the movies. But he's, as we've all said, he's very stylish visually. And yeah, there is, I don't want to say a dourness. There is a seriousness to his films. So for those hoping for maybe a Brosnan or a Roger Moore era Bond movie, I think they're taking that news of Denis a little harder, especially with his comments on Happy, Sad, Confused, where he said that Casino Royale and Skyfall were his favorites, just because those are Daniel Craig movies. But those also happen to be like 2 of my favorites too. But it doesn't mean I don't love, one of the earlier style entries, one of the lighthearted entries, and having Connery 2. Like, just because those are his favorites, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the type of movie he's going to make, especially, which we're going to get to in a little bit, the rumors of who may or may not be James Bond. But I feel really encouraged. And that leads me to question, like we mentioned, his wife is coming along, but like, who would his director of photography be? Because he's already worked with Roger Deakins on Blade Runner, who did Skyfall. And that's, in my opinion, that's the best looking Bond movie. So would he reteam with him, or would he stick with Greg Fraser, who's done the last 2 Dunes and also did the Batman and a host of other movies, who's also a really good cinematographer? So either way, I think it's going to look great.
No, absolutely. I think visually it's going to be superb. I think Roger Deakins said he didn't want to do another Bond movie after Skyfall. He said that's why he didn't return for Spectre. But I may be misremembering, and 10 years later he may change his mind anyway.
No, I saw the same quote. I don't know if it's from the exact same source, but I've seen those quotes attributed to Deakins. He had done his one, and he he was really into the story and he just didn't want to do another Bond. But again, that was also a decade ago. So, things change.
And having someone that he worked with before might change his mind as well.
Yeah. It's never say never again, as I say.
And do we think that having him on board and the length of some of his more recent movies, does that mean we're going to stick with the 2.5 hour Bond movie? Or do you think Amazon's going to insinuate, this has got to be under 2 hours to get, the turn and burn of the movie theater?
That was one of my fears to start with, and it was also why I thought that he wasn't going to be a good fit for Bond, because I think these longer Bond movies, there's too much bloat. They need to have something cut out of them. They need to be much leaner than they are. But then somebody pointed out to me on YouTube that not all his movies are actually that long. He did a movie about the Mexican drug cartels,
Sicario.
Yeah, and which oddly I'm not sure if I've seen it or not. I may have, but I'm not entirely sure. But that comes in at just under 2 hours, and I will watch that when I get the chance to, because I think probably rather than looking at Blade Runner and Dune, that is probably closer. That's closer in tone to what Bond is going to be. So we should be looking at that for what he's capable of. And there's actually something else I want to say about Dune in particular, that he turned the first book into 2 movies, which was a smart move, because the book is, I don't know how many pages. It is very dense, and it actually, I don't know why it wasn't published as 2 books in the first place, because it actually is split fairly closely to halfway through into 2 fairly equal parts. So that completely makes sense. But it's a very complicated story, and the book was considered unfilmable for many years. He's taken that, he's gone to the book, he's taken that, and he has reworked the story for cinema, and completely successfully, judging from part 1. So, if he takes the same approach to Bond, I don't think he'll go back to the books and literally film one of the books, because they've all been done more or less, and so and there's nothing less to do, and I can't see the point of redoing Casino Royale or redoing Goldfinger, for example. But what he can do is go back to the books and take out the essence of Bond and create a new story, really that really feels like it's Ian Fleming. And we've had really weak villains for too many films running. I think that we're going to get a good villain, we're going to get a good story, and we're not going to have these kind of third act, washouts where the films are just a kind of damp squib at the end. They just don't really work, and that's happened in No Time to Die. It happened in Spectre. It happened in Skyfall. You can say what you want about Quantum of Solace. The last film that actually worked in the third act was Casino Royale. And that's not a good run of that's not a good record to have. So I think
I think 20 years ago too.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I think he can probably fix some of the problems that we've had in the recent Bond films, and I hope he can.
One thing, there's been this phrase. It was popularized by Edgar Wright, who was also on that short list of potential directors, where he said something to the effect that Bond movies go through cycles of dark chocolate and milk chocolate, and that we've come through a period of very dark chocolate with the Daniel Craig films. It might be time to lighten them up, and a lot of people like that sentiment and would cite it in Calvin Dyson's YouTube channel, for example. But there have been others, and boy, it seems like, I think we're going to get more dark chocolate. I don't know, but maybe he'll surprise me. we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I don't see that we're going to get light chocolate. I can't see that at all based on what he's done before. He's a serious director. He doesn't do lightweight stuff. He goes for the darkness, and he fully commits to it, because if anything, we're going to go back to Casino Royale, but have it even darker. It's going to be grittier. It's going to be much grittier than Casino Royale, even, I think.
I'm curious with him how, the Bond girl or the Bond woman is going to be handled, and what prominence in the story they're going to have, because from like Sicario going forward, like there are very strong women in his movies who have their own character arcs, and I'm curious what that's going to bring to the table, because I can't see, in this day and age, someone trying to bring back Dink, for instance, that we'll see someone, whoever it is, more in line with like a Tracy or a Vesper, and have some emotional depth to them. And I think that's exciting as well. And, he brings, as Bill found out the hard way, he brings a certain kind of audience also that, maybe wouldn't necessarily check out a James Bond movie. So that's always good. Having the ability to say, Academy Award winning director, worked really well the first time with, Sam Mendes. Mm-hmm. So that also is going to bring eyes to it. And if you're not going to get Christopher Nolan, who, somehow makes a 3-hour movie about the atom bomb, a global blockbuster with no action really whatsoever, Denis is the type of director who can do something like that as well, who can take something that you wouldn't expect to be a huge hit and make it so. Granted, Blade Runner didn't set the box office on fire, but that is a very, very well-regarded movie. And while maybe it didn't do well in cinema, it was also 2021 when the movie-going experience was still hampered by HBO Max deals and streaming, and people were still kind of skittish about going back. We've seen with his last two movies that he can make a worldwide hit. So I'm really curious who's going to come out of the woodworks to see this just because of his name being attached. I think it was probably the smartest move they could have made when it came to picking a director. And as much as I love Edgar Wright, like I don't feel he's more of a cult favorite than a worldwide favorite.
I was about to say Dune Part 2 was, I saw this list, the top grossing movie for each of the major studios, and I believe Dune Part 2 was the top grossing one for Warner Brothers. It didn't make $1 billion, but it was in the 700s, maybe almost 800, something like that. And so part one was hampered in the U.S. because that was in the middle of COVID, and they had simultaneous streaming and theater releases. So that was obviously going to hold down the box office. Whereupon part two was released in the more standard way of exclusive theatrical window and then goes to streaming. And then and like I said, it did better than any other Warner Brothers movie in 2024. Anyway, but.
We'll see. It also had the IMAX bump. It had the spectacle of, we shot this with IMAX cameras. You need to go see it in IMAX or a premium format, which since Skyfall, Bond has done. And they definitely did that with IMAX cameras for No Time to Die. But there is something to that where, studios are pushing. We shot this in IMAX, go see it in IMAX to get that experience. And that's what we want, right? We want that cinema experience with Bond. Like Bond belongs on the big screen. You want to see all that budget. You want to see the scope. And, he's proven with his Dune movies that he can definitely deliver that. So I'm excited just for that aspect, because I would assume that he would keep going along those lines and use IMAX cameras and give us, an adventure that we haven't typically seen before.
In addition to IMAX, there are other premium formats out there. One which I discovered just this week when I went to see F1, it was the brand name was X Screen, but I think I heard the technical name for it. Anyway, you have 3 screens. They don't show the 3 screens all the time, but in the case of F1, all the racing sequences were shown in 3 screens. And it kind of gives you, when all 3 screens are working, it gives you like a 270-degree experience. Kind of sucks you in. It's, again, that's not the same as IMAX, but it's, they charge more for it. And also, some regional chains, to compete with IMAX, have come up with their own big screens. Here in Michigan, there's a regional chain called Imagine, and it's sort of their flagship theater. I forget what they call it, but they claim it's the biggest in the state. And I'll take them at their word, because I have seen some movies on it, and it's pretty big. They say it's about the size of a basketball court. And one thing about length, I don't know, it's like the studios in general, I don't know, it's like 2.5 hours, almost like the opening ante. It's like, Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning was like 2 hours 45, 2 hours 50.
I mean, that is a overindulgence from the director and the star, though. They have their carte blanche to do whatever they want.
Right. Well, and F1 is 2 hours and 36 minutes, I think. Not every movie's like that, but there has been there has been a trend of, it seems like, more longer movies. In the old days, when you didn't have multiplexes, there was pressure to keep it shorter. And like in the case of Lawrence of Arabia, it was a very long movie to begin with. And then on subsequent re-releases, they kept cutting stuff out of it. So they could get, the churn and burn effect, get more people going through the theater. Now with multiplexes, at least for the first few weeks of release, you've got more screens. So you can, if you have on more screens, I think there's less pressure to get them, in and out as quickly, because, you can make up for it with the additional screens. So I don't know, but like I said, I saw both Mission Impossible and F1, so it was kind of they're both long movies.
In one of the reports that came out after this, Insider says that Amazon has Final Cut, which is not something I think Denis is used to not having. So that is an interesting wrinkle in the story as well, because, he doesn't have the final say. And what's the studio going to do when it comes down to, okay, you've made a great movie, but it's 2.5 hours and we want it to be shorter. And also, too, they're probably thinking of it from a monetary standpoint of, you could get 2 versions out of it now. You can have your theatrical experience and then sell that movie, and then 6 months later come up with an expanded cut down the road.
Just for streaming.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be the director's cut only on Amazon Prime.
Exactly.
Yeah. But do you know, when I was a kid, I always used to feel cheated when films came in at less than 2 hours, and now I feel cheated if they're more than 2 hours 20 minutes.
Let's move on to the other breaking news, or maybe it's safer to say breaking rumor, although it was published in Variety on June 27th. They had an article, "What's next for Denis Villeneuve's Bond movie?" Amazon's wishlist includes Jacob Elordi, Tom Holland, and Harris Dickinson. Bill, I don't know how familiar you are with these actors, but what was your initial thoughts to seeing this news?
Well, 2 of the 3 I didn't recognize. Tom Holland, of course, I recognize. But years ago, I say years ago, within the past 5 years, say, Holland was interviewed on like the red carpet at a movie. He said, "I'd like to play James Bond." And I don't know about that. People complain that Daniel Craig wasn't tall enough. I'm thinking, he's, let's see, I believe he was born in 96. So he's playing, he plays younger, at least when he plays Spider-Man. And he gets by.
Don't forget that Tom. I was going to say, sorry, Bill. I was going to say, don't forget that Tom Cruise played Jack Reacher.
Right, that's true. Yeah. Tom Cruise, who once had to stand on a box while being photographed next to his wife, his then wife at the time. I once saw this. Someone took the picture. He's being photographed up close with her, and then somebody's like, way behind, got a shot. There he was on a box. Anyway.
It should be worth noting that Amazon declined to comment for that story, but the insiders say the studio and producers are interested in casting a British actor under the age of 30, with Jacob Elordi, Tom Holland, and Harris Dickinson at the top of their list. And that Elordi is Australian, but that's not a deal breaker as far as Amazon is concerned. And they cite George Lazenby as the example. And for some reason, the article also drags up Idris Elba being a fan favorite, even though he's 52. And they go on to say no meetings have happened at this stage. David, what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I don't think there will be, at least.
Like Bill, the only one I'd heard of was the Tom, whatever his name. I can't even remember what his name is. Tom Holland, that's the one, yes. And I mean, I haven't seen the Spider-Man movies, but I associate his name with Spider-Man. So that's it. I don't think I've ever seen him in a film. I don't know what he's done apart from Spider-Man. I've never heard of the other two, so difficult to comment. Their age is striking. I wasn't expecting somebody that young, to be honest, but it may mean that Amazon is looking to try and target a younger demographic. And I just wonder what existing fans are going to think of a Bond who's in his late 20s. I think that's going to be a bit painful. And also it means there's going to be a certain generation of fans. I'm used to having a younger Bond. Daniel Craig is a few years younger than me anyway. But there's going to be a whole generation of Bond fans who were expecting that the Bond after next would be the one that's younger than them, but they're going to start feeling a bit older than they were anticipating, I think, as soon as that Bond is announced, if it happens.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, not only trying to capture a younger crowd, but if it's also trying to get the most life that they can out of their actor. Mm-hmm. The younger they go, the longer they can keep them, and not have him look like Roger Moore by A View to a Kill. If however long a deal they make with this actor. I asked my daughter, who's 18, and I said, here are the three people, and I said Jacob Elordi. She's like, no. She knows him from Saltburn. He was also Elvis in A24's Priscilla movie. And he does a great job in both of them. I don't necessarily think of him as Bond. I said Tom Holland, and she scrunched her face and was like, no. So,
okay. Is she a Bond fan?
I don't know.
You haven't done a very good job, have you?
Well, I mean, she grew up watching them all when she was younger. She's seen every Bond movie, and I'd say she's seen 3 of the Daniel Craigs in cinema, although she was also 2 weeks old when Casino Royale came out, and we took her to a baby day screening, so it was okay. Babies were allowed to go. It was more so my wife at the time could get out of the house and see a movie. But on Father's Day, she watched Diamonds Are Forever with me, so... Mm-hmm.
She's kind of a Bond fan.
Yeah, she's seen them all, and she'll hang out with me and watch one. But I don't know if it's necessarily her first choice in movies. But she was not for Tom Holland, and I would have to agree for several reasons. I think he's a good actor. Like, I've seen him in The Crowded Room, where he played someone with multiple personalities. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel he doesn't have that certain something that a Bond should have. He doesn't have that type of presence. And also, I wouldn't want someone who's got prior commitments. And we really don't know what his, if this next Spider-Man movie is going to be his last, or how much he's going to be in the next two Avengers movies that are connected. But I wouldn't want to have to, wait again for like, well, he can't film Bond this year because he's too busy doing Spider-Man and all the promotional things that go along with it. I not to say that actors can't have more than one role, but I just don't want to have to be waiting for the next Bond movie because he's off doing his other things.
Yeah,
it'd be nice to have someone where it's their main commitment.
I think it's difficult to have an actor who is in more than one big franchise because I think to a certain extent it dilutes them. Are they Spider-Man or are they Bond, for example? And so I think it would have to be one or the other.
And he does really well in that role. Like he's physically adept at, the gymnastic part of it and everything else.
I was about to say, in terms of age, I guess we should keep in mind, Sean Connery was 31 when he filmed Dr. No. He turned 32 before the movie had its premiere, but now he played older. He may have been 31 chronologically, but he looked like he had a lot of mileage on him, like hard, tough experience kind of mileage. So, I don't know about these three specific names at this time, because at the same time they're saying, okay, we want a director first, want to then get the script nailed down, and then we cast. So it's like, this seems a little early to be talking about.
Yeah.
In a serious way. It's one thing to
and again, this
throw out
is
names.
An insider.
Right.
This isn't direct from the studio. So
right.
The final candidate, Harris Dickinson, who's also born in 1996 like Tom Holland, he was in Triangle of Sadness, which got a lot of Academy Award nominations. Most recently, he was in Baby Girl, and which is an A24 movie, and The Iron Claw, which was the year before, which was based on a true story. He played one of the Von Erich brothers, who was a wrestling family that seemed to kind of have a curse on them. A lot of bad things happened. And that's also, like I said, A24. So he's got the prestige crowd. But I actually recently just saw him in The Kingsman. I finally watched that after, all the delays that went through during COVID, and just for some reason I never got around to it, even though I enjoyed the other two. Finally saw it, I think, within the last month. And he plays Ray Fiennes' son in the movie, Conrad Oxford. So he's a pretty major character in the beginning of the film. And so you can kind of get an idea of what he would do as Bond, because he comes from an aristocratic family, yearning for action, and he has a major fight sequence in the middle, which is one of the best fights of the whole movie, I think. So of the three, if those were my choices, I would probably lean more towards Dickinson, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I have Baby Girl. I haven't watched it yet. I just haven't found the time to get it, but I think he's the one that from his past work that I've seen that would give me the most Bond-like from his prior roles.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And also he's a lot taller than Tom Holland too. I mean, Tom Holland's 5'6.5", according to IMDb, and Dickinson is 6'2". So he's got that, traditional 6 foot tall Bond that we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But I don't know if they have a shortlist at the moment or not, because I wasn't expecting anything about actors at the moment. It's just, they've just got the director. They need to work on the script. They may have an idea for a story, but they really need to work on the script, and that is going to take a bit of time to kick into shape. And it's only then that they really know what kind of Bond that they're going to be looking for, I think. So,
like what type of character are they going to make going forward? And they're not going to know that 2 days after announcing the director. They might have a direction, but They're not going to know.
No. There's one thing I would say, though, that Amazon does appear to be moving pretty quickly because, we had the announcement that Amazon was taking over creative control in February. I think it was February the 20th, something like that. In March, it was almost exactly a month afterwards. I don't remember the exact date. They announced the producers, and then it transpired that that was the day after the deal had closed. And then there was the announcement that they were actually working on Bond, which you would hope that they'd get stuck into it immediately. But and now we've got a director, so things really are moving. So I think that's good news, because we had this kind of black hole of no information at all about Bond after No Time to Die. It was always Barbara Broccoli saying, "Oh yeah, well, we haven't quite started, so we're not going to start thinking about it for another couple of years, blah blah blah." And that was just dispiriting all the time. So at least we've got something to actually get stuck into and talk about seriously.
Right. It's been a little over 4 months, since the deal with Amazon was announced.
Yeah.
And so as David says, compared to the pace we've been used to, Amazon really seems to be taking this very seriously. And I suppose it's a little disappointing it might not be out till 2028, but hiring Villeneuve, having the new producers on board, right after in time for the sale to close. Amazon clearly all in on this, and that's whereupon in the last years of Eon, it came across, at least they were kind of distracted, they were tired, whatever. But so yeah, just a sense of momentum that's present right now. So we'll see.
And I think that given the age that we live in, the 2-year turnaround on Bond movies is probably a thing of the past. And we just have to be honest with that. And even with Amazon being pedal to the metal, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume every, 3 years instead of every 2, just because it takes so long. And bringing up like the times that we're in right now, just with everything is still, we're still trying to get back up to speed with how things were before, after COVID and all the various strikes and the studios with their special effects. Like, they're still falling behind and having to deal with those struggles of playing catch up in the work pipeline. Mm. So, if we ever get back to 2 years turnaround, like it's still probably a few years away from that.
I have a different thought about that, actually, because I think that Amazon may very well start to go for the 2-year turnaround. And my thinking is this. In 2035, the copyright on Ian Fleming's works expires. So that means that any other filmmaker can make a Bond film based on Ian Fleming's books. That also means that they can't use any elements that came from the films. So they can't use Q as a character because he didn't feature in the books. He's purely from the films. They can't use the Aston Martin DB5. They can't use the gun barrel. They can't use the theme music, and so they can't use many of the elements that we associate with brand Bond. And so you end up with a film that's like Never Say Never Again, which it's kind of Bondish, but it doesn't really feel like a Bond film fully, at least to me. So, I think Amazon is going to go all out to make as many films as they can before 2035, and make the Bond brand so strong again that any other studio that thinks they're going to make their own Bond film, they're just going to decide, no, it's not worth it, because the Bond brand is too strong to compete with.
Well, I like that theory, and I hope you're correct. So,
yeah, it's wishful thinking as well, but yeah, I just I don't know. We'll see. They're certainly ambitious, I think. So let's hope they're that ambitious.
Well, I wouldn't say no to their ambition trying to get this done by 2027, even though, on the other hand, I don't want them to rush this either, because this is probably the most important movie since Casino Royale, if not GoldenEye. So a lot's riding on it. And Variety closed out their article with the following paragraph: that they have a short list of writers who will chart the future course for the man with the license to kill. One scenario making the rounds is that Jonathan Nolan, whose take on the material was enthusiastically received at Amazon, would write the screenplay. Though Nolan has a close relationship with the studio via the series Fallout, sources say he is not available to write. So on one hand, they're saying this is likely, and also not.
Well, I don't know what's going on there, because he was one of the rumored directors, and which didn't make any sense to me, because he doesn't have any experience of directing feature films as far as I can see. He's only done television, and so from going from TV to a $250 million movie, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. I don't think Amazon would want to risk somebody who hadn't, cut his teeth on doing, $25-50 million films before that. So I don't think that was real. I think he was talking to them about writing, not directing.
Yeah, I wonder if that was like, just a game of telephone, and that's how he got lumped into that group, maybe.
Yeah.
Bill, are you familiar with Jonathan Nolan's work outside of, co-writing the Dark Knight trilogy?
That and he co-wrote Interstellar with his brother. That's writing, not directing. My understanding on Interstellar was that Jonathan Nolan wrote the early drafts, and then it became a Christopher Nolan directing project, and then Christopher Nolan rewrote his own brother's stuff, and they both shared the writing credit. I know he's done television work as a director, but I've never seen it. So, and once upon a time, it might have been possible to give the keys to a relatively inexperienced director. Steven Spielberg had directed only one feature film before he did Jaws, for example, and that wasn't supposed to be as expensive as it was, but it was successful, and then he was off and running. But even then, he had done made-for-TV movies. He had done 90-minute TV episodes. Spielberg now, prior, then the Sugarland Express, I think, was his first actual feature film. And then he did Jaws, and so you could do that one time, but I think studios right now are really risk adverse, and they want to. I think on this they want someone with experience, and they have him with Villeneuve.
Yeah, I mean Spielberg's a generational talent. Like there's not really that many filmmakers like him, and Nolan's been in the Jonathan Nolan, I should say, has been in the business long enough. But he hasn't broken through in that way as a director. So even though he probably has his brother on speed dial, I can't see them taking that kind of risk. Well, obviously they didn't, because they went with Denis. But writing a movie, I wouldn't be adverse to having him be involved in some fashion. I'd be curious to see what kind of tone he would bring to it, because if you look at the Dark Knight trilogy or Inception, there's a lot of little Bond homages that are throughout those movies, like which ones came from Chris, which ones came from Jonathan, and also they're brothers, so they probably grew up watching them together. So I wouldn't be opposed to his involvement, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be, we're not just going to have one writer on this anyways, because we never do. There's always someone does the story, and then someone else does something, and then they have another draft. And how many people were on No Time to Die, which I know isn't the best example, because it went from Danny Boyle to Cary Fukunaga, and then we had Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and was Scott
Purvis
Burns,
and Wade. Purvis and Wade.
Wade.
They started it, and then they were shunted aside for John Hodge when it became a Danny Boyle thing. And then they wanted to have John Hodge rewritten, and that's part of the reason Danny Boyle left, the creative differences part. And then like, oh, well, we're back to Purvis and Wade. And and you mentioned not everyone who was involved got a credit. Scott Burns, it was funny, they mentioned him when they had that reveal in Jamaica in the spring of 2019, but he apparently didn't do enough under the Writers Guild regulations.
He disappeared. Yeah.
And so the final screenplay, I'm trying to remember, Purvis and Wade, Cary Fukunaga, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge all got some form of credit. And then also, Denis Villeneuve's probably going to do some work on the script as well. He's done that on Dune.
Yeah, and he's got screenplay credits on his 3 Dunes, so...
Yeah. No, I think he's likely to be involved with the script, yeah.
And more than likely beyond just story capacity. Like, I could see him getting a screenplay credit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely, I agree.
As I understand it, with the Writers Guild, you can have up to 3 writers or writing teams get a credit. And then, then eventually it goes to the Writers Guild and they examine all the drafts and they decide who gets a credit. I mean, as a footnote, for example, with The World Is Not Enough, started out with Purvis and Wade, Dana Stevens did the middle draft, Bruce Fairstein did the final draft. And apparently Eon just wanted to have a Purvis and Wade credit because on the novelization by Raymond Benson, it said, novel by Raymond Benson based on the script by Purvis and Wade. But Bruce Fairstein filed an appeal with the Writers Guild. And so relatively at the last minute, and after the novelization had gone to press, that writing credit was Purvis and Wade and Bruce Fairstein, story by Purvis and Wade. Mm. So yeah, it's. I'm sure we'll have something. I mean, the only Bond script I know of that had one writer start to finish was Live and Let Die, and that was Tom Mankiewicz. Other than that, there's always been multiple people. So
I could see happening is them, like Denis coming up with the basic storyline, and then they assign someone to write the first draft of the script while he's working on Dune. Go through a couple iterations of that, and then when he's done with his, when he's got time from Dune to go in and do like a final draft, and then get his credit that way.
No, I think it's going to have to work like that. Yes. And I mean, especially if the 2028 date is wrong, if they're still aiming for 2027, then it's essential that he's going to have to be working on both projects at once.
Well, one final footnote, I guess we should note. So this apparently is finally the end of the line for Purvis and Wade. We kind of figured that out once Amazon got creative control after having done 7 straight movies. It's worth noting, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think the question remains how many of the traditional Bond team will be invited back, if any. Is Amazon going to invite Chris Corbould to the Bond Amazon one, or is it goodbye to all of that cottage industry that has generated around the Bond movies? Because there's a lot of talent there. And, does Amazon want to have any continuity, or do they want to make a clean break with what happened before? I think that's a huge thing.
Well, it's interesting to me that during the Craig era that they've leaned more towards the auteur director bringing along some of their own people. And that's why we haven't seen David Arnold in too long. So I could see them doing a little bit of both, of having, Villeneuve bringing on some of his people, which may mean Hans Zimmer as a scorer, which I would not like, despite enjoying most of No Time to Die score. I will admit that. But it would make sense to me if I was trying to get this off the ground as fast as possible to keep all those the majority of those technical people in place because they know what they're doing. And if you want to get it out quickly, you stick with people who know the ins and outs of it and what the production requires. And we see already that Heyman's trying to keep it UK based. So it would make sense to keep those people that are already there in play, at least. Maybe not necessarily Corbold, but like maybe promoting one of those other people up, or if Denis has his own person that does all that. But for the most part, keeping the structure that's already the infrastructure that's already there,
but
not starting from scratch.
I think maybe it depends on how much Amazon perceives that some of the problems with Bond are with all of those people and all the technical people that are associated with Bond, and I don't know. I mean, maybe they don't see that that's a problem at all. But if they do see that that's a problem, then I think they're less likely to invite them back. But we'll see.
Well, for example, Chris Corbold, he's more than just Bond. He won an Oscar, I think, for one of the Nolan Batman movies, and he's worked on Star Wars theatrical films. They haven't had one in a while, but he has worked on those. So he has a resume that goes beyond just Bond. And I could, not knowing his schedule, not knowing the situation, and I could see them being interested in having him work on the film. We'll find out.
Yeah. So we need an announcement from Amazon about their plans for the schedule. We need to know when it's going to start filming and when it's going to release and all that kind of stuff. So come on, Amazon.
It's been as we kind of wrap up here, it's been an interesting month to be a James Bond fan. So I feel like we've been, in this desert for so long with nothing really happening. And in the last, month and a half, we've gotten the full Felix Leiter novel from Raymond Benson came out. The first trailer for 007 First Light, which looks very cinematic. A Le Chiffre return to video games, but this time under Hitman, which I finally did beat him the other day. Mm-hmm. And there's multiple ways to do it, so now I'm still working on it. Yeah. But still nothing on the comics side of things, but we've gotten the Goldfinger vinyl LP from La La Land. I just got mine this past week. They announced a few more CDs that are coming in the pipeline. And then we have this Bond, movie news. So I feel like we're in a really good place right now because all of a sudden all these things are happening. It's really exciting after, let's re-rank our top 25 Bond movies again, Yeah.
As Bill will confirm, if you run a Bond-related website, it becomes a full-time job.
Yeah. Yeah, but just second what Javi said. It is, it's from the time No Time to Die came out in the fall of 2021 until February of this year. It was just, you're in the middle of the Sahara without a map. So yeah, it's things are a lot more interesting than they had.
Yep, for sure.
I'm surprised that the actor that's the model for Bond in the video game didn't make it onto that rumor list.
Yeah.
Well, there's always time for the Daily Mail to add it.
That's right.
Or the Sun. Although the Sun may still be pushing Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Yeah. He's going to be Bond's dad.
Yeah, that's right. He'll have a cameo in the movie. He's like, holding on to the rope. Yeah.
Goodbye, Andrew Bond.
Aaron Taylor Johnson was also in The Kingsman as well with hopeful Dickinson. So yeah, maybe there's a connection there.
All will be revealed in due time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't it. I sent you guys a post, and I'm trying to remember when it was. I think it was Aston Martin shared a picture of Tom Holland next to an Aston Martin. Maybe, and I joke like, here goes the news cycle that Aston Martin has confirmed the next James Bond. Well, maybe they weren't too far off the bat now, thinking about it in hindsight. How everyone jumped at Aaron Taylor Johnson is back because of the Omega post.
Mm-hmm. The Omega post, and he was on the red carpet for 28 years later. And then he kind of ended in interviews. I got a job coming up. And everyone's going, he's going to be Bond. And I was thinking, his job might just be a new Jameson's commercial.
June 20th, Aston Martin's Instagram said guest of honor, award-winning actor and Bureau Brewing founder Tom Holland joined us for a thrilling weekend at the 24-hour, is it Le Mans? I can't read the hashtag, but yeah, I think that's kind of ironic that.
Yeah, it must be Le Mans that happened fairly recently.
Well, yeah, Le Mans is always in June.
Yeah, so who knows at this point? Maybe that's one of the things that inspired that rumor in the article, that he was seen with an Aston Martin. So, well, fellas, is there anything else we wanted to talk about or cover today? Or is it time for our holiday?
I think it's time for a holiday.
Definitely time for a holiday.
But we have ideas.
I have an idea, and it's the beach.
I meant for season 3, but yeah.
Let's do a few quick shout outs in the meantime. Bill, where can people find you on the internet if they want to touch base with you?
The Spy Command is at hmssweblog.wordpress.com. If you look at the down the left side, I have links to other web pages of mine. The one called the Spy Command Feature Story Index, I think it is. There's various things in there, including the assorted timelines associated with recent James Bond films, and other archive stories I had done in the past. So, yeah, that's a good place to reach me.
And David, how about you?
I am at thejamesbonddossier.com, and if you are in need of a cold drink this summer, don't forget I'm also author of The Complete Guide to the Drinks of James Bond, if you want some ideas.
I do comic reviews on batman-on-film.com, which if you haven't seen Matt Reeves' post, I think it was yesterday or the day before, he's turned in his script for the Batman Part 2. So that's exciting because it's been 3 years since the last movie. And if you want to hear me talk James Bond, obviously right here at the 007 Files, which has a YouTube page, please go over to YouTube and subscribe to the channel where we drop the audio versions of these conversations. And also I just had a video go up where I unbox and do a quick overview of the new Sean Connery 4K limited edition steelbook set. So if you're curious what is on that, how they look, please go and give that a look. And you can follow me on Instagram at The Bond Is Not Enough. So I think that's going to do it for this season. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, gentlemen, for all the work you do for this show. It is appreciated.
Thank you. Same to you.
And the 007 Files will return.
Take care.